welcome to Deep Dive. We're talking today about something really crucial in our closest relationships, something that's often unseen but carries a significant weight. Emotional labor.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. It's that subtle checking in you do with your partner, the almost constant awareness of the emotional atmosphere between you,
Yeah.
the quiet anticipation of needs that aren't even spoken out loud, and those endless mental lists that go far beyond just, who's doing the laundry.
That's right. This isn't your typical to-do list of household tasks. Not at all.
Mm.
We're diving into the deeper, often invisible effort of managing the emotional well-being of a relationship.
Right.
You might look at a couple and think everything appears balanced on the surface, but beneath it, there can be a real disparity in who's carrying this emotional load, leading to a very real and often unrecognized exhaustion.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we want to explore today. We're going to take a deep dive into emotional labor in relationships, what it truly entails, and maybe more importantly, what the impact is when that labor isn't shared in a balanced way.
So let's get into the core of it. The term emotional labor might sound a bit academic, right?
A little, yeah.
And it actually has its roots in sociology from the 1980s. A sociologist named Arlie Hochschild first coined the term to describe the emotional management required in many service industry jobs. Think about having to maintain a positive demeanor, show empathy, stay calm, even in stressful situations.
Right, like a customer service representative who has to remain patient even with a difficult customer, that kind of thing.
Exactly that.
But how did that concept then find its way into discussions about our personal relationships?
Boy,
Because that feels like a bit of a leap.
that's a great point. It did evolve. Over time, the understanding of emotional labor broadened to encompass all the efforts we make to manage the emotional landscape within our intimate partnerships. It's essentially all the behind-the-scenes work we do to keep the emotional gears turning smoothly.
Okay, so let's make this really concrete. What are some specific examples of emotional labor within a relationship? Because it's so often unseen, I think many people might struggle to pinpoint whether this is happening in their own lives.
Certainly. Yeah, it can manifest in numerous ways. A key aspect is actively tending to a partner's emotional state.
Okay.
This could involve offering comfort when they're upset, providing support during stressful times, or even proactively sensing and responding to their unspoken emotional needs.
Uh-huh.
It also frequently involves being the one who initiates those tough but necessary conversations
Oh, the heart talks. Yeah.
where you address conflicts or maybe more profound issues in the relationship.
I can imagine how constantly being the initiator of those kinds of conversations would feel like a significant responsibility, a heavy lift.
It truly is. And it extends beyond just talking about problems. It includes the often unseen work of remembering and organizing social and emotional milestones, birthdays, anniversaries, important family gatherings.
Right, the mental load of planning.
Frequently being the one who takes the lead in planning and ensuring these events feel significant.
Mm.
Another key component is regulating your own emotions, sometimes even putting your own feelings on hold to prioritize your partner's comfort or well-being.
Oof, that one sounds tough.
It can be. And for many couples, it's about being the primary emotional connector, the one who consistently strives to maintain a strong emotional bond between the two of them.
That term emotional connector really captures that sense of ongoing effort, that nurturing of the relationship's emotional health.
It does.
And as we mentioned at the start, what makes this so complex is that so much of it isn't tangible. It's not a task you can just check off a list.
Exactly. Nature makes it difficult to measure or even fully recognize.
Yeah.
You can't easily quantify it and say, I performed X amount of emotional labor today.
Right.
Because it lacks that concrete quality, it often goes unacknowledged, and that's where the challenges of unequal distribution really begin to surface. It's like the unseen infrastructure of the relationship.
Which brings us to a really important question. Who tends to shoulder this invisible burden? And the research seems to point in a pretty consistent direction, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. While it's absolutely true that anyone within a relationship can engage in emotional labor, study after study indicates that it disproportionately falls on women. even in partnerships where there's a conscious effort towards equality in other aspects of the relationship.
Even when people are trying to be equal.
Even then, yes. You mentioned a particular study that highlighted this.
I did. Oh, right. Yes.
Yes, a 2019 study published in the journal Sex Roles offered some really compelling data. It found that women were significantly more likely to be the ones who consistently monitor the overall emotional climate of the relationship,
Monitoring the climate.
who take primary responsibility for addressing conflicts when they arise, and who habitually prioritize meeting their partner's emotional needs, sometimes even at the cost of their own.
Wow.
That last part is particularly significant, the idea of their own well-being taking a back seat.
That really underscores the potential for imbalance. So what are the underlying reasons for this disparity? Is it just something that's like ingrained in our social fabric?
There are indeed deep societal roots at play here.
Yeah.
Very deep. We're talking about the cumulative effect of decades, even centuries, of social conditioning.
Right.
From a very young age, girls are often encouraged to be nurturing, to be sensitive to the emotions of others, and to be accommodating. They often receive praise for being caregivers and for prioritizing relationships. It's like an unspoken training in emotional attentiveness.
And the messages that boys receive are often quite different, aren't they? Like starkly different sometimes.
Absolutely. Boys are frequently socialized to suppress any display of vulnerability, to be stoic,
Yeah. Boys don't cry.
and consequently, they may not develop the same level of emotional literacy or comfort in expressing and processing feelings. This can unintentionally create a situation where they are less equipped to both recognize and meet the emotional needs within their adult relationships. It's not necessarily a conscious choice, but a result of these deeply ingrained societal expectations.
So it's almost a self-reinforcing cycle.
Yep.
Women are often conditioned to be the emotional managers, and men, through a different kind of upbringing, might unintentionally become more accustomed to relying on that management.
That's a very insightful way to look at it. It can create a dynamic where one partner consistently takes on that emotional leadership role,
Yeah.
while the other might become, not necessarily intentionally, but effectively emotionally dependent in that realm.
Yeah.
It's like an unconscious division of labor that often isn't discussed or even recognized.
It's fascinating and a bit unsettling, actually, to see how these early influences can shape our relationship dynamic so profoundly. You also touched on another layer, linking emotional labor to our early experiences and what we call attachment styles. Could you elaborate on that connection?
Certainly. Our attachment styles, which essentially are the patterns of relating we develop in our earliest relationships, usually with primary caregivers, they can have a significant impact on how we approach emotional labor in our adult partnerships.
Okay.
For example, individuals with what we call an anxious attachment style, often characterized by a strong desire for closeness and maybe a fear of rejection, might tend to overfunction emotionally.
Overfunction. How so?
They might constantly seek to anticipate and meet their partner's needs, proactively resolve conflicts, generally work very hard to maintain a sense of connection and security in the relationship. It's sort of a way of trying to ensure their needs for closeness are met.
That makes sense. Almost like a preemptive strategy to avoid any perceived threat to the relationship stability.
Exactly. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have individuals with an avoidant attachment style,
Okay.
who may be less comfortable with intimacy and emotional vulnerability. They might tend to underfunction emotionally.
Underfunction.
They might withdraw when faced with emotional demands, shut down during disagreements, or perhaps feel overwhelmed by expressions of strong emotion. This isn't necessarily a sign of not caring, but maybe more a reflection of their discomfort with intense emotional engagement.
So you can see how those two contrasting styles might inadvertently create a dynamic.
Yes.
Where one person is constantly reaching out and doing the emotional work of maintaining the connection, while the other is perhaps less actively engaged or even withdrawing emotionally.
Precisely. The overfunctioning of someone with an anxious attachment can often complement, in a way, the underfunctioning of someone with an avoidant attachment.
Right, they fit together, but maybe not healthily.
Creating this unconscious pattern where one partner becomes the primary emotional regulator for both individuals. And this dynamic can feel strangely familiar or even normal if it mirrors relationship patterns from one partner's childhood or family environment, where they may have grown up in a similar emotional climate. It's like we unconsciously recreate patterns we're familiar with, even if they aren't ideal.
It's that feeling of this is just how relationships are, without necessarily recognizing the underlying imbalance or considering alternative ways of relating.
Exactly. And the crucial thing to understand is that This silent, often invisible weight of unequal emotional labor doesn't just fade away, it builds.
Hmm.
It accumulates over time, and as we'll discuss next, it can lead to some really significant and often damaging consequences within the relationship. It's a slow burn, you could say.
Let's delve into those consequences then. Because on the surface, as we've said, things might appear to be functioning okay.
Right.
But what are the real psychological costs when one partner is consistently shouldering the bulk of this emotional responsibility?
When this imbalance persists, it almost inevitably leads to a sense of being unfairly burdened within the relationship. That's almost a given.
Yeah, I could see that.
And these feelings can manifest in several key psychological costs. One of the most prevalent is resentment, just straight up resentment. The partner who is constantly performing the emotional labor may begin to feel more like a parent to their significant other than an equal partner.
Ouch.
The relationship can start to feel incredibly one-sided, and those initial feelings of love and affection can gradually get eroded by frustration and even anger. It's like the scales are tipped and one person feels constantly depleted.
That makes perfect sense. It's difficult to maintain intimacy and connection when you feel like you're constantly having to anticipate and meet someone else's needs while your own go unnoticed or unaddressed.
Absolutely. And that constant management of both emotional worlds without a genuine sense of reciprocity can lead to profound burnout.
Right.
This isn't just everyday tiredness, it's a deep emotional exhaustion that comes from consistently giving emotionally without feeling like you're receiving comparable support in return. This can occur even in relationships that appear outwardly healthy to friends and family. It's an internal drain.
So it's not always about overt conflict or arguments, but maybe more a quiet internal depletion of emotional resources.
Exactly. And over time, this can contribute to emotional disconnection. It's almost ironic.
How so?
Well, the more one partner takes on, the more the other may unconsciously come to expect that those emotional needs will always be met by them,
Creating dependency.
creating a cycle where genuine intimacy and mutual vulnerability diminish. Instead of a deep emotional bond, the relationship can start to feel more like a set of defined roles and expectations. It loses that spark of connection.
And I imagine for the person consistently carrying this weight, there's also a significant risk of losing touch with their own needs and desires. Like, who even am I outside of this role?
That's a critical point, absolutely. When your primary focus within the relationship becomes supporting and managing your partner's emotional world, it becomes increasingly challenging to even identify, let alone prioritize, your own needs, desires, and even your own sense of self.
Yeah.
It's as if your emotional energy is constantly being directed outward, leaving very little for your own internal landscape. And these psychological costs, as you pointed out, don't just affect individual well-being, they can severely weaken the very foundation of the relationship itself.
This all paints a really clear picture of the significant impact of unequal emotional labor. It's quite serious.
It can be.
So, what practical steps can couples take to address these dynamics and cultivate more emotionally balanced relationships? Where do they even begin to make these shifts? It sounds daunting.
It can feel daunting, but it's definitely possible. The first and arguably most important step is cultivating awareness. Just seeing it.
Okay.
Recognizing that this dynamic of unequal emotional labor might be present in your relationship is often the biggest hurdle to overcome. Once that awareness is there, you can start to actively work towards creating change.
Okay, so awareness first,
Yeah.
then what? What are some of those concrete actions couples can take?
One of the most powerful initial steps is simply to name it, to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Using non-blaming language to articulate what you're experiencing can be a really effective way to start a productive conversation.
Like using I feel statements.
Exactly. For example, saying something like, "Lately I've been feeling like I'm often the one who initiates our conversations about how we're both feeling," can open up a dialogue without immediately making your partner feel accused or defensive.
Right.
It's about describing a pattern, not assigning blame.
That emphasis on using non-accusatory language seems absolutely crucial for a constructive conversation. Otherwise, people just get defensive.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
key. Another helpful strategy is to try to make the invisible visible. Seeing these tasks written down can make the imbalance much more tangible and harder to overlook. It transforms an abstract feeling into something more concrete you can discuss.
It's a really practical way to bring these often unseen efforts into the light. I like that.
It is. Another valuable step is to establish regular emotional check-ins, like scheduled check-ins.
Intentional time.
Exactly. Intentionally create moments, whether it's a brief conversation at the end of the day or maybe a longer discussion once a week, specifically to ask, how are we both really doing emotionally?
Hmm.
This encourages both partners to share their feelings and needs and reduces the tendency for one person to always be the one initiating these important conversations. It normalizes emotional well-being as a shared responsibility.
It shifts the dynamic from one person being the emotional weather forecaster
Yeah.
to both partners paying attention to the emotional climate together.
Precisely. Well put. And then there's the important and ongoing process of challenging those deeply ingrained socialized roles we talked about earlier.
Yeah, the conditioning.
For men, this might involve actively developing their emotional vocabulary, becoming more comfortable expressing their own feelings, and recognizing that engaging in emotional caregiving is a sign of strength and connection, not weakness.
That's a big cultural shift for many.
It is. And for women who tend to overfunction emotionally, it's about learning to establish healthy boundaries
Okay.
and understanding that saying no to taking on more than their fair share is not selfish, but actually a necessary act of self-preservation and for the overall health of the relationship.
So setting boundaries is key for the overfunctioner.
Absolutely. These are significant shifts in mindset and behavior that take time and conscious effort from both partners.
Those sound like really powerful shifts.
Right.
And what role can professional support play in this process, like therapy?
Therapy can be an incredibly valuable resource for couples navigating these dynamics. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Couples therapy, particularly approaches like emotionally focused therapy, EFT, or maybe the Gottman method, can provide a safe and structured environment to identify these often unconscious emotional patterns and help couples develop healthier, more reciprocal ways of connecting and communicating.
Okay.
A therapist can act as an objective observer, helping to eliminate patterns that might be invisible to those within the relationship and guiding them towards more equitable ways of sharing the emotional load.
So ultimately, what's the overarching goal here? It's probably not about perfectly splitting every single emotional task 50-50 down the middle, is it? Relationships aren't spreadsheets.
Not at all. No, that's not realistic or even desirable, probably. The aim is to move toward what we call emotional reciprocity.
Reciprocity.
To reframe emotional labor not as an obligation or a burden, but as an integral part of a healthy and thriving relationship.
Mhm.
Something that, when shared authentically, actually deepens closeness, builds trust, and fosters a stronger sense of safety and security between partners.
So it becomes a source of connection, not resentment.
Exactly. In many ways, in contemporary relationships, this emotional reciprocity is becoming a fundamental element, perhaps even more so than some of the more traditional measures of partnership we might have focused on in the past.
It's really about shifting the focus, isn't it?
Yeah.
Moving away from simply asking who contributes what tangible thing to the relationship, like finances or chores,
Yeah.
to exploring something much more internal, more relational, and ultimately more vital to the emotional well-being of both individuals and the partnership as a whole.
Precisely. It's moving beyond just the question of who's doing what and delving into a deeper inquiry. Can we both, together, truly create a space where each other's hearts feel seen, understood, and cared for? That, in essence, is the heart of emotional reciprocity.
That's a really beautiful and insightful way to summarize it. And as we bring this deep dive into emotional labor to a close, I think it's so important for our listeners to really consider this within the context of their own relationships.
Yeah.
If you're the person who consistently remembers the details, who often initiates the check-ins, who frequently finds yourself being the one to repair things after disagreements, and who sometimes feels like you're not only managing your own emotions, but also those of your partner, please recognize that you are doing real and significant work. It matters.
Absolutely. It's real work, and it's crucial to acknowledge that work, to find ways to share that responsibility, and to honor your own emotional capacity, because ultimately the emotional weight you carry truly matters. But as we've explored today, you were never meant to carry it entirely alone.
Thank you so much for joining us for this really important and, I think, eye-opening conversation.
My pleasure.
If you found this deep dive helpful and thought-provoking, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of our future explorations into the dynamics that shape our lives.